Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Camilla, and today I have a very exciting video. I've been compiling it for months and, checking my list, checking it twice like Santa. I'm going to be doing my predictions for the Women's Prize for nonfiction. I decided that I would take up a list of 16 nonfiction work published in the last year by women. That sounded really interesting. Last year I did not do that well with my predictions, but it was really cool to start looking into it, and I think you really see the need for a women's prize list when you see the end of year wrap-ups, like top nonfiction of the year and stuff like that, and often the lists are mostly men, and I read more nonfiction in 2024 than I did in previous years, and obviously a lot by women and because of the prize. So I think it's just showing how great of an sort of initiative it is. So I'm really happy to participate and to hype it up and to talk about it. So these are the 16 that I think have a vibe of, talking about women, about different aspects of a woman's life, or a more sort of global experience. I've made this list in order of release dates, so starting from April last year until early 2025, as this is what's eligible for the year. A good caveat to this is that I've read none of these books, but they just sound amazing. So let's jump right in. And the first book that I wanted to highlight was The Swans of Harlem, 50 Years of Sisterhood, 5 Black Ballerinas, One Incredible Story by Valby. And this was published in April 2024. It sort of sets the scene in Harlem in 1969 when there was, I believe, it says it's the height of the civil rights era. Arthur Mitchell is the first Black principal dancer of the New York City Ballet, and it says takes his protest to the stage and establishes a dance theater of Harlem. And then we sort of go through the history of 5 of the women who danced as part of this, and it tackles lots of other kind of really big moments of the era, including the AIDS crisis, and just, it sounds so interesting, and I love dance, so I think that would be great. The second pick is The Garden Against Time, In Search of a Common Paradise by Olivia Laing. This was released in May 2024. In this book, Olivia Laing sort of discusses her experience of restoring a walled garden in Suffolk, and this is sort of paralleled with looking for paradise and sort of gardens. And so I guess the meanings of garden, moving between real and imagined gardens, from Milton's Paradise Lost to John Clare's Enclosure Elegies, from a wartime sanctuary in Italy to a grotesque aristocratic pleasure ground funded by slavery. Laing interrogates the sometimes shocking cost of making paradise on earth. Sounds really cool. In number 3, I have Private Revolutions by Yuan, and this was also released in May 2024. This is a book that discusses the life of 4 women born in China. It says between in the 80s and the 90s, and sort of their dreams of better futures for themselves and for just like a global. So it says, with unprecedented access to the lives, hopes, homes, dreams, and diaries of 4 ordinary women over the period of 6 years, Private Revolution gives a voice to those whose stories go untold. And I thought this was a really interesting new book that's come out, especially about the lives of women in China. And I think the prize last year went quite global, so I think this would be really cool pick to add in there. So yeah. In number 4, I decided to add in My Beautiful Sisters by Khalida Popal, and this was released in June 2024. This is actually sort of a memoir as the fall of Kabul to the Taliban in 2021, and there was a national women's football team. I believe that Popal was like one of the founding member as well as the captain, and she had fled from the Taliban previously and come back, and then became a refugee again to Denmark. And a lot of her work since she's gone out has been talking about the sexual abuse that a lot of the players were subjected to by, I think it was the former president of the Afghanistan Football Federation. So when Kabul falls, Khalida is safe and her teammates are left behind. Against all the odds, she and a small but mighty network of allies orchestrate an international evacuation strategy to save them. I think this blends so many different things, like in terms of a moment in history and in modern history, something's happened recently that's devastating, a personal relationship and effect on her personal life, but also like a feminist rooted movement to like lives of these women, these football players, and what they've endured, and also just trying to save them. It just sounds amazing. In number 5, I have Sing Like Fish, How Sound Rules Life Underwater by Amorina Kingdon, and this was published in August 2024. It says, for centuries, humans ignore sound in the silent world of the ocean, assuming that what we couldn't perceive didn't exist. It says it's an intimate and artful portrait and a sort of story of the ocean animals' submerged sounds. And it says, envisions a quieter future and offers a profound new understanding of the world below the surface. I think this is really cool, like the oceans. I think I put a book about oceans last year as well. Even though this is like the sound of fish, it sounds really weird. Like it's a whole world that we don't actually know that much about. So I think this is really cool. Another sort of animal focused book, I have Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. This published in September 2024. It says like when lockdown started in 2020, Chloe Dalton left the city and moved to the countryside where she spent her childhood, and she found herself with like a newborn hare and sort of raising it and taking care of it. And it says chronicle their journey together and the challenges of caring for the leveret and preparing for its return to the wild. We witness firsthand an extraordinary relationship between human and animal, reconnecting with our childhood enthusiasm for wildlife. And I've seen it on a couple of people's best books of 2024 list, so I think that's kind of a good sign. So I'm putting it here. In number 7, I have By the Fire We Carry, The Generation-Long Fight for Justice on Native Land by Rebecca Nagle. This was released in September 2024. It says, she recounts the generation-long fight for tribal land and sovereignty in eastern Oklahoma in the US. And it says, by chronicling both the contemporary legal battle and historic acts of indigenous resistance, By the Fire We Carry stands as a landmark work of American history. And I think all these rewritten histories of like how indigenous people were like treated and how all of this battle for land and like how it was taken and stuff like that is so important to discuss. So I wanted to make sure I had a book on this subject here, and this sounded really interesting. Even though it's like clearly very specific based to Oklahoma, I thought it could have something just in general about the history of indigenous people and their treatment in North America. Next, I have The Story of a Heart by Rachel Clark. This also came out in September 2024. And this is the story of a transplantee, I guess. It says this is the unforgettable story of how one family's grief transformed into a life-saving gift. Dr. Rachel Clark talks about the urgent journey of Kira's heart and explores the history of the remarkable medical innovation that have made this possible, basically. And it stretched back a century, and it involves like lots of stuff and dedicated kind of surgeons and scientists. And apparently it's just really touching. I've heard some reviews that have just been really poignant, so I think it's gonna be a good one. Then another animal-based book, which I realize I have maybe too many on this list, but we're going with it. The Age of Deer, Trouble and Kinship with Our Wild Neighbors by Erica Hauser. This was released in January 2025, or is about to be released. I didn't actually check the date in January, but here we are. It says, from the earliest cave paintings to the present day, humans and deer have a long and complex history. Royal hearts were the coveted quarry of European kings, while the first Americans relied on deer for everything from buckskins to arrowheads. Once hunted to the point of extinction in some parts of the world, deer numbers have exploded in the recent years, causing tension between scientists and conservationists. And yet this is our own story, as the fortune of deer is inextricably bound with the action that we humans take on the world around us. So it sounded really cool, like historical, but a little bit like in terms of climate and our relationship with the natural world and how the balance of that. So it sounded really interesting. Next, we have Original Sins, The Miseducation of Black and Native Children and the Construction of American Racism by Eve L. Ewing. This is coming out in February 2025. I think this is again one that's maybe a bit too centered around the US, but it sounded really cool. And I've been seeing it on some people's like most expected books of 2025. So I think it has a lot of prospect. So it says, Ewing demonstrated that our schools were designed to propagate the idea of white intellectual superiority, to civilize Native students, and to prepare Black students for menial labor. Education was not an afterthought for the Founding Fathers. It was envisioned by Thomas Jefferson as an institution that would fortify the country's racial hierarchy. And Ewing argues that these dynamics persist in a curriculum that continues to minimize the horrors of American history, which I guess goes back to the book also about Native people on the land. The most insidious aspects of the system fall below the radar in the forms of standardized testing, academic tracking, disciplinary policies, and uneven access to resources. I think, again, education, racism, historical kind of legacies, and I guess impact on the present and future, I thought sounded really powerful and important. In number 11, we have The Hidden Globe, How Wealth Hacks the World by Atossa Araxia Abrahamian. And this is also coming out in February 2025. I have a lot of books that haven't come out, but they sound so interesting. So it says, borders draw one map of the world, money draws another. A journalist's riveting account exposes a parallel universe exempt from the laws of the land and how the wealthy and powerful benefit from it. I feel like this is really timely and I think it's going to be really interesting, and potentially it's all stuff that we're kind of already aware of, but just talking about it and making it even more obvious is important. Then in number 12, I added Minority Rule, Adventure in a Culture War by Ash Sarkar, and this is coming out in February 2025 as well. It says Minority Rule is the term Ash Sarkar uses to describe the irrational fear the minorities are trying to overturn and oppress majority populations. In her eye-opening debut, she reveals how minority elites rule majorities by creating the culture war that have taken over our politics, stoking fear and panic in our media landscape. Because despite what they'll have you believe, anti-racist campaigners aren't actually silencing the forgotten working class. Immigrants aren't eating your pets. Trans activists aren't corrupting your children. And cancel culture isn't crushing free speech. I think this was advertised to me in bookshop.org as an upcoming nonfiction that I might like. And I'm like, yeah, I think so. So I added it to this list. I think I ended up taking something off the list to add this in because I thought, oh my god, that sounds so interesting. And again, very timely. In number 13, we have Looking at Women, Looking at War by Victoria Amelina. This is also coming out in February 2025. Victoria Amelina was, I believe, a fiction author, and she was living in Ukraine when the invasion started in February 2022, and she sort of found herself documenting and writing about the war. But she died in 2023, I believe. She was in a restaurant that exploded due to a missile, and yeah, she died not long after from her injuries. But it says here she left behind an incredible account of the ravages of war and the cost of resistance. I just again thought this was very timely and an interesting book that potentially, I don't actually know if it's illegible if the author has passed away, but it's clearly been wrapped up and finished for publication following her death, so I guess we'll see. But I thought this was an interesting one to highlight. We're almost there. In number 14, we have The Women Are Not Fine, The Untold Story of the Women Behind the Greatest Mass Poisoning of the 20th Century by Hope Rees, and this is coming out in March 2025. So it says that this happened in Hungary. So basically a midwife arrived to assist kind of poor women with abortions, stuff like that, and she would offer them this solution. I think it says arsenic made of kitchen larder, flypaper boiled with vinegar. But when they told her of the violence they were suffering at the hand of their husband, she concluded, why put up with them? And nearly 20 years later, it spiraled into an epidemic of the greatest mass poisoning of the century. Basically, a bunch of them were killing their husbands. So yeah, it sounds like a really interesting look into a moment of history. This is giving me a little bit the vibe of Cursed Bread from 2 years ago, because this was also inspired by a real case, I want to say. But yeah, it sounded really interesting. I think that I took out the Hallie Rubenhold book actually and put this one in because it gave me vibes of of kind of her writing, focusing on women and history and stuff like that. So we'll see. In number 15, we have The Rebel Empresses, Power and Glamour in the Struggle for Europe by Nancy Goldstone, and this is coming out in March 2025 as well. Although the more I'm looking at this one, the less I think it's gonna make it, but I still thought it sounded interesting. It's basically about Elizabeth of Austria, I think it's Sissy, and Eugenie of France. Sorry when I switch languages. So they were married to emperors Franz Joseph and Napoleon III. and they became two of the most famous women on the planet. It says not only were they both young and beautiful, becoming cultural and fashion icons, they played a pivotal role in ruling their realms during a tempestuous era characterized by unprecedented political and technological change. And finally, in number 16, we have Maternity Service, a love letter to mothers from the front line of maternity leave by Emma Barnett. This is also coming out in March 2025. In this book, I think Emma Barnett was going through her second maternity leave and pregnancy, and she sort of reflects on the experience and tries to capture the reality. So it's not like a self-help book about how to deal with your maternity leave. It's celebrating and acknowledging the work that is being done on maternity leave. And she calls it maternity service. I mean, the more I look at this, I feel like from day to day, like there's other books I could have put back. You know, there's Sociopath that has come out. Like Love by Maggie Nelson. Again, the Holly Rubenhold book, Story of a Murder. There's also In Exile by Sadia Ansari. There's so much out there, so doing 16 is always difficult. So yeah, I'm excited to see the long list very soon. Do you have a predictions video? Let me know, or if you have any predictions, just you don't have to have made a video, put them in the comments below. I would love to see what you think is a nonfiction that might be longlisted for this prize. I think it's really exciting. The list last year was just really strong. So yeah, very exciting, and I'll see you soon with an update. When the long list is announced, I will make a reaction video and we'll discuss. So anyway, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you back. Bye!